going. Sorry I have to have like a small bit before I start each video. I realized I could cut it out, and I'm trying to do that in the edit process when I upload it to YouTube. It's just when I start the stream, I have to run a whole different bunch of programs like I have to do right now, just to make sure that everything is functioning properly. Which it should be, but you never know. Alright. We're all set to go now. And I apologize, probably a lot of you, or none of you is going to be watching this stream right now. I do the stream as basically a quick way to pretty much live edit all of my work, because it makes it a lot easier. Basically, being able to see live what is happening and what is being uploaded. And it would be the same exact quality that it would be normally recording, because I do all the recording with a standard webcam right now, which does make it a little difficult to get full HD quality and 30 frames a second. But as far as tech work goes, that is not the biggest concern, as long as you are able to see what is happening. That is all I care about, and hopefully I position my camera to where it comes out a little better. I figured out a way to set the camera to record the right side up that I wanted it to without having to flip it in post after it's already uploaded and have to reprocess it and everything like that. But anyways, that's enough for all that kind of talk. This is the A&K SR-25 Gearbox. I've already disassembled the gun, some of the parts being right here. I've already taken off the motor and all that. There's a screw bit stuck to it. I actually really like this motor. I'm pretty sure this is JG Blue, just because I have worked with a lot of JG motors, and this is, well, I mean, it's got the same look and feel that the JG Blues do. I mean, the torque on it is ridiculous, which is very nice. I love a good high torque motor. It's very difficult to come by that in a stock gun. JGs, if they like post that they have more than like 360 FPS, there's almost always a JG Blue motor in it. JG Blue motors are by far probably the best stock motors you can have. And I mean, I know people have their quarrels about that. Like if they buy a GNP, a KWA, and some other guns, they're going to think that it's going to be better. And I have worked on GNP motors, the M120 motor to be exact. I've even seen their Satan M180 motors, or just 180 motors, whatever it's called. And where's my little push pin? It was sitting right here. Am I sitting on it? No. There it is. It's sitting behind my water. I want to make sure I don't mess any shims up, so I'm going to press all these bushings down in so that they don't come up on me. I don't know if the bevel is going to want to, because it's being a little stubborn, so I'll just have to be careful with it. This spring is actually not that oh wow, that is a very low spring. That is surprising for an SR-25, and the whole reason I'm working on this gearbox is exactly what I thought it was. The whole reason this is not an upgrade procedure. This was a gun that had gone down and the owner wanted fixed. And as soon as he told me the problem, I already had a good idea, because everything was functioning except no compression was being made and no like cycling was happening, but the air nozzle and tappet plate and everything else like that was working. And that is because the piston is completely cracked off in the back. Left a giant gaping hole in the middle of the piston, if you can see that. Try and get it in the light, but trying to position it to where it's easy to see. But yeah, that whole piston is completely messed up. And the problem with the SR-25 is it actually uses an enhanced piston. Best way I can compare that is, here's a normal M4 version 2 piston, here's the SR-25's piston. As you can see, it's got about 1 centimeter more length to it because it also uses an extended cylinder. What this allows for is more air volume to be pulled in the cylinder, so you can actually achieve a lot more FPS from a lower spring. So what I'm probably going to be able to do with this, because I'm going to check the gears out real quick, make sure there's no wear on them from the damage that they might have taken when the piston cracked. All the gears look in fine shape. None of them look like they have very much wear on it, which is a very good thing. So it means not much damage happened internally. I will be cleaning out this gearbox though, because it is filled with a bunch of nasty factory grease, and you want to get that out of there as soon as possible. I'm thinking about re-shimming the gun, but my main goal right now is just to get it firing, and I do not have a piston that I could put in this gun. Well, technically, you can use a standard piston in an SR-25. The problem is, you are going to be getting a lot lower FPS than what you would normally be getting because of the amount of gear teeth. With the SR-25 one, it would be able to pull back all the way to the rear and then release and allow all that air pressure. Whereas a standard one, and you'd also have to, mentioning it, if you had to swap out for a normal piston, you would also have to swap out for a normal sector gear, because this SR-25 sector gear has a lot more teeth than a normal sector gear would, so it can match the amount of teeth on the extended piston. Because it would go all the way around, it would get to the last tooth, and then release. Whereas with this one, the normal one, it would continue going all the way down, and then it would start skipping on the teeth. And that will either, one, completely ruin your piston and your sector gear, or it'll ruin one of the two. Either way, it will ruin one of them. So it would have to have a sector gear with the amount of teeth, the same amount of number of teeth that the piston has. Best case scenario being like if you bought the Angel Custom Thor piston, the metal piston off of e-bike, it actually has one less tooth than a normal piston would, and so you have to either shave a tooth off of your current sector gear or get a short stroke sector gear to begin with, because that piston is a short stroked piston, which allows for a lot faster firing, but it also does mean a loss of FPS. Mostly short stroking is good for reliability purposes, and if you're just over the FPS mark, knocking off or short stroking a piston, and that'll bump your FPS down. Say like if you wanted to swap to a CQB setting, that's the biggest reason I see people doing short stroking on their pistons. But the main reason is to get their gun firing faster. It does provide a little bit higher rounds per second, but not a ridiculous amount. So I'm just going to go through, probably clean this thing out. Yeah, it's filled with a bunch of junk. But now that I have seen the problem, I'm going to start looking through all the parts and just seeing what needs to go. Something I already noticed that I really like, and if you saw the SIG video, then you probably heard me say this before, but I am extremely pleased to see that this actually comes with a full metal ball bearing spring guide. That is a very nice thing to have. That is what I run in all of my guns, and it is almost a necessity now. You want to make sure you have a ball bearing spring guide, unless you're running Well, I mean, I see it, you can probably use it with just about any setup and it'll run a little better. Some people think you shouldn't do it on a high FPS setup, like a 500 plus FPS DMR setup, but I've known enough people who do run them and they're perfectly fine. Now, if you get a cheap one, yeah, something might break, but I wouldn't count on it if you get a good, decent one. But as far as the gears go, they look just fine. And if I cannot find the, I'm gonna most likely recommend the SHS extended piston for this gun, because that is one of the only full metal tooth extended pistons you can get for these gearboxes. There used to be a couple others, but I have not seen them stocked in stores for a very long time. Ooh. Oh, it has a white O-ring. I was like, wait a sec, does this not even have an O-ring on it? I would probably also recommend changing out the cylinder head. It's just a basic plastic cylinder head with a single O-ring. The pad on it is nice, but you definitely want to get something full metal, and preferably it having the double O-ring for a better air seal, because this is extremely loose in here, and that's not a great thing to see. You want to make sure they're nice and tight when you're fitting them in there. It'll give you better air seal and more consistent FPS all around. And there's a lot of other things to get more consistent FPS, but the majority of it involves air seal. And where did the air nozzle go? It fell off. Oh, it's on the tablet plate. Just gonna pop that off. Check it out. No O-ring. I'm most likely sure that the SR-25 uses its own air nozzle, but I'm pretty sure that I've seen air seal nozzles with the O-ring for SR-25s. Most likely all of them would use the same air nozzle, whether it's, because some SR-25s actually don't have the extended gearbox. I know a lot of the newer ones that people have been using do not have it. The A&K one, though, does. And I actually really like that, because if you planned on building a DMR, this kind of gearbox, great platform. The biggest reason is actually the extended cylinder and piston, because you're able to reach higher FPSs without needing to put like an M150, M160 in the spring in the motor, can't talk. An M160 spring, which is a lot of stress for a gearbox. For that kind of spring, you would need probably a MOSFET and a LiPo to even get the motor to power that kind of spring. And I mean, I know some people have done it, but I mean, for the best, most consistent firing, like a good trigger response, you're not having to wait a second for the gun to fire after you pull the trigger. It would have to be running a MOSFET, a LiPo, one of the best high torque motors you could get, like a Lonex Titan motor, a G&P Satan motor, the Sistema A to Z motor, or the what's the last motor that or the amp 5000 or 3000, whatever it is. I think it's 5000. Those motors are pretty much the only ones that would probably pull a spring that heavy and beyond that. I mean, there's some people who've been able to get something like a JG Blue to power that kind of spring, but I wouldn't recommend it. I'd recommend getting something infinite torque, and it will serve a lot better in the outcome. And you would also probably need a little bit better wiring set. These are a bit thin, and I'd be a little bit worried about overheating. The good news is, it looks like these are silver coated white. They are, because there's actually a tear in one, which I'm going to have to repair with some heat shrink tubing, and if any of the wires are wrapped, I have to resolder it. But it is silver corded wiring. That is another very good thing to see. You don't see that a lot in lower end guns, which, I mean, A and K, I wouldn't exactly call them lower end. They're competition guns easily, but they're definitely not up there in your super performance, like flawless performance, great gun. Or they are a great gun out of the box, but they are a Chinese company, and I mean they can only get so good. But in terms of their actual quality, I'd say they're pretty close up there with JG. And I mean, JG, they make some of the best starting off performing guns for anywhere from beginners to actual professional players, just because they're so dang reliable. And I realize the snapping of the piston doesn't show well for it, but I have seen just about every kind of gun company with their standard plastic pistons do this. I've even seen a good Mad Bull full metal tooth piston do the exact same thing that this one did. So it's not something that is uncommon. And I mean, really, if the gun is properly adjusted, the angle of engagement probably could have been better, and that's something I'm going to definitely fix before I put this gun back together and all that. But now that I know the problem, it is going to be a lot easier to actually fix the problem, and I'm glad it wasn't a wild goose chase. So now that I figured out it was piston, I will have the owner of the gun order that, or I can order it for him. It should be here within a week, and then we can get to work. And at the same time, I'm probably going to get a better spring. An irregular pitch spring will definitely work better than this. And this spring is actually fairly tricky to compress because it is a powerful spring, but it was a lot easier to take out because of the extended gearbox than a normal spring would, because in a normal spring, this kind of spring would be hanging off about that much off of the end, whereas this one was about like that. So it's really not that big of a problem, but an irregular pitch spring will definitely help on the reliability and performance side, and the shots will be a lot more consistent, and the gun will cycle much better. If you don't realize what an irregular pitch spring is, it's basically, if you look at a spring, it's not the same length all throughout the coils. There will be some that are a little bit more compressed in the middle, and then it starts spacing out on the edges, and then it gets compressed again at the ends. And what that does is it basically allows the spring to compress easier, but has a harder rebound than what a normal spring would, because this has the same consistency to push in as it does its rebound. And when you can get a spring that compresses easier than it does releasing, then the gun will be able to cycle faster with less stress, but you'll still be getting the same amount of power out of a normal spring, which is a very good thing. So I'm going to start going through all of these parts, cleaning them out, and doing all that. Just a heads up, most of these videos, one of the videos is going to be a complete takedown of a gearbox like I just did here, and going over the parts, especially if they're a stock gun. This way you guys can actually see what you're getting when you purchase the gun. If you're a little bit concerned about what actually goes in, because a lot of companies will say high torque motor, full steel gears, all this other stuff, and you really won't know what's going in your gearbox unless you open it up most of the time. Because there's been plenty of guns that I've bought where it's like, it'll say it has something, but when I get it, it doesn't look like it comes with that thing that it says it did. So that is definitely the first reason why I'm even doing all of these videos. I mean, I've gotten a lot of talk saying, Since this is my job, I'm a local gun tech here. Why am I doing this? It's basically ruining my business when I really don't think it is, because when you're gun teching, a lot of it is based on experience, and I've been doing this now for over 2 years as far as gun teching, and I've been in Airsoft almost 4 years now, because I will have started when I was 18, or no, when I was 15, and I will be 19 here in August. So, and I realize that's a little bit young for what most of you probably realize is a tech, but I mean, I learned it and I've been experienced with it, and now I've gotten to where I know what I'm doing, thankfully, and I do a lot of my own custom work, which is also why I'm getting more work. But I don't feel like it's ruining my business, if anything. In fact, it's more of an aid, because that way the people whose guns I'm working on can actually see what I'm doing, and that way when I try and explain to them what I'm doing, they're not completely in the dark, and they don't just have to take my word for it. They can actually realize that what I do is for the better of the gun, and in the best interest of the owner. And that way, they also don't have any trust issues. Like, when I first started, I was working on a lot of guns, and it was very difficult to explain because no one had ever had a tech in that area, and then I came around and started working on guns, and a lot of my own guns never worked. And it was because I kept buying cheap parts, and that was back when I was very inexperienced and didn't know what I was doing very much. And so a lot of people saw that, and they did not want me working on their guns, and I can't really say that I blame them. I was unexperienced. I didn't know what I was doing then. It was all experience to what I know how to do now, and my mistakes made me a better tech. So it's a lot of trial and error with Airsoft. After so long, you start learning little tricks that will make guns better, or little tricks if you run into a problem, how to fix those problems. Best example I can give for that is these two little nubs right here. If you try changing your trigger assembly, sometimes in a gearbox shell, these nubs will actually be too tall. So when you try and close your gearbox shell, it can lock up your trigger assembly to where the trigger contact is stuck in the contacts. And at first, I didn't realize what was going on. I would put together my own gearbox that I had bought. That would happen, and I would be completely in the dark about why it was happening. And then one day I finally realized that those nubs were crushing the trigger assembly to where it kept locking up. So what I did was I took a file and I filed them down, and then when I closed it, it worked perfectly fine. So that's where I figured out the solution to that problem. And there's been a lot of other different things that have come down the road. Since I first started, I learned how to properly solder. I learned how to do electrical work. I learned how to properly shim guns. Air seal, angle of engagement correction, everything like that. It's just something that I've learned throughout experience. It wasn't something that I could just basically look up a YouTube video how to do it and then be able to do it. It took me 2 years to get the kind of knowledge and experience to do what I do now. And I mean, there will be plenty of times where I'll goof around and probably do things to my own guns that I would never do to anyone else's. Just like very few or very modifications that I can remember doing to my old SCAR just to try it and see what would happen. And I'm actually going to remove... Where's my little screwdriver? There it is. That's odd. The actual trigger contact is screwed into the piece. I haven't seen that before. I mean, it's nifty, but I don't exactly know why, considering you can't exactly buy a contact replacement unless you made your own. Which, I mean, you might be able to, but I haven't seen any in the United States. I'm actually going to remove all this so I can clean it easier. But basically back to the tech talk. I do this because I enjoy doing it, not because it makes me money, because to be honest, it doesn't make almost any money. The amount of time that I spend on these guns, comparatively, I would be making less than half of minimum wage. Considering I only charge $10 to open up a gun, $20 to open a gearbox, and then pretty much part costs, like if I have to order any parts, that's pretty much it. So the only money that goes into my pocket is basically that basic charge of if I have to use parts, some of my own parts in the gun, because I've had to use plenty of shims from my own set of parts on a lot of these guns, so that would be one of the reasons that I would have to charge extra. And then to the other charge that I would normally do is if I had to open up a gearbox and the person wanted to know what all they could upgrade, what were my recommendations, what is getting worn down, basically a full gun inspection to make sure that what they could do in the future or what they would be wanting to do now while the gun is apart, and little things like that. That is normally a base of $25, and that's basically the $20 to open up the gearbox and the $5 for the extra time that I have to spend researching parts and making up an entire recommendation list, which a lot of you who are watching this video know what I'm talking about because I've probably done it for you at some point in time. At least all the people local. If you're not watching locally, I mean, obviously you're not know what I'm talking about, but basically I put together a long list of options that the owner of the gun has to upgrade the gun, and my recommendations for parts that I have known to be good in the past. Things like certain gear sets, pistons, cylinders, tight bores, everything like that. And I will just pretty much give my recommendation and why I recommend such a thing. I mean, I don't just say, buy this, you need it. I say, here it is, here's what it would do, here's the pros and cons of it versus this, and it is up to you whether or not you want to buy it. And I'll do that for a few different options, like if they want a little bit more FPS, or if they want a more accurate rifle, or if they want a more reliable gun. I mean, I do have my go-to parts as far as replacements go, because I have been through enough of them with my own guns and other people's guns to know that they work and they are good quality and they will serve the purpose that they are meaning to. And I also know what parts to steer away from, because I've probably bought them in the past, used them in one of my own guns, and realized what happened. Because I had that problem a lot when I first started. I would get a part that looked like it was gonna perform great, like that Mad Bull piston I had. It's a green Mad Bull piston off e-bike. It's not really attached to the piston body, like the tooth rack. It's not actually attached, so it was sitting there almost loose within the piston body, and mine might have been a lemon, But I still didn't like that even happened. I mean, a good quality piston, especially a full metal tooth piston, should not do that at all. I mean, that's just absurd. Especially for Mad Bull. I mean, I've always liked Mad Bull, but it put a sour taste in my mouth, definitely, for that kind of part, which is part of the reason why I don't buy Mad Bull internals anymore. Just because I had that one bad experience, which I realize there's a lot of lemons in the airsoft parts industry. And could I have sent it back and got another one? Probably. Did I? No. I'm a bit stubborn when it comes to replacements, so I just dealt with it and bought the G&P half metal tooth piston. It basically has a half rack metal tooth, and that's what I started using in my G3 DMR build. And it has been performing incredible. The past few games that I've taken it to, it's shooting about 400 FPS on 0.25 gram BBs and close to 20 rounds a second, and that's on a 9.6 volt battery. So I'm extremely pleased with the performance of it. Granted, the gearbox alone probably has about $250 worth of parts in it, because every part in that gearbox I did custom work to. And it took a long time to get that thing firing where I wanted it. Because the gearbox was originally designed for a SCAR. My original SCAR L that I had, which was my first airsoft gun. But that's pretty much what it was meant for. And then the ASCU that I had bought for it didn't work because it is designed to work with an M4 selector plate, which the SCAR does not use. It uses a proprietary selector plate, and to be more specific, it was the Classic Army, the old Classic Army SCAR L, the old $400 one, not the Sportline edition that they have now, but the old Classic Army SCAR, the big, beefy beast of a gun that a lot of people wanted but never could afford, and I bought it for $200 off of eBay because someone was selling theirs that they had used maybe twice, and they had already done some custom work to it. But needless to say, all that custom work is now null and void because everything, I've been through multiple gearboxes in that SCAR, and I'm to the point now where I'm just going to drop one of the G&P gearboxes in it, put my SCAR selector plate on it and SCAR air seal nozzle that I bought a while back, and be done with it. That's pretty much where I'm at with that gun. I've put up with it for too long, so I'm just going to get it to where it runs decently. I'll put about a $70 gearbox in it, and that's the rest that I'm going to do with it. I'm not going to try and make another gearbox for it or anything like that, and I'll find a different use for that ASCU. I might put it in my in a backup M4 eventually, because I have an old JG M4 that I've been using for a while as a backup gun, or a friend gun when they come over and play Airsoft. If they need a gun, that's what they use, and it's a good performer. I love that gun. But I mean, if I really wanted to, I could do some more to it and make it even better. And I'm already going to have to re-shim it because I think I forgot which shims went where, but oh well. I already plan on doing that anyway. All Chinese guns, I have seen them, even APS guns, they always need a re-shimming. JGs, normally their gear sets are made for their gearboxes, so I have not had to re-shim a JG. They come really, really close, so I just haven't taken the time to re-shim a JG just because it comes out of the box pretty well put together. But I have not seen any other company other than VFC with their auto shim system that has a decent shim job. So I almost reshim all of my guns when I get them. It's not needed all the time, but it's just something I do for a little bit added performance. And if I have the shims, I mean, why not? It keeps me something to do. When I first was about to open this gearbox, something worried me. Right there, I saw what looked to be the forming of a crack. And so, like, I was completely jaw-dropped because these gearboxes are supposed to be a lot more sturdy than a normal version 2. As you can see, the reinforcement all throughout this piece is ridiculous. It's even got the external little extra piece of metal to keep cracking from happening, because this has been proven right here to be the weakest point in a version 2 gearbox. But with the version 2.5, which is what some people call this one, I just call it an extended version 2. It's supposed to be a lot more heavy duty in that aspect. It is not reinforced a lot in other places, but at least on the edges you get the added reinforcement bar and the reinforcement pegs for the wiring and stuff. So that is a nice feature to have. Plus it just makes the gearbox come together a little better. But zinc alloy gearboxes, which this is actually an aluminum gearbox, which is a good gearbox, same kind of material that the G&P gearboxes are made out of. Very sturdy material. It's just I'm almost guaranteed it's CNC'd aluminum, but don't quote me on that. It just looks like it is, because I've worked on a lot of G&P gearboxes. About probably 5 or 6 different G&P gearboxes, because that's what I'll drop in most guns that are just like, you want a full tune-up, get one of these, and it's good. And it really is. I mean, from a stock competition grade gun, dropping a G&P gearbox, it'll definitely serve you good. Yeah, you will have to make some modification to the wiring, which is why I recommend, if you are not comfortable, have your tech do it, a local tech, or send it in to someone you know who works on guns. Do it, because it will require soldering. What I mean by that is, G&P gearboxes, unless you are using a G&P motor, they have their own proprietary motor connectors. So you will have to solder on your standard motor connectors, like that, onto the wiring set to allow to use any kind of normal motor. The G&Ps basically have a screw-in system where there's a hole in the points on the motor, and you screw the wiring to the motor, which I actually don't like that much, because it seems to there's not a lot of there's some resistance in doing that. And I mean, there's some resistance in using these kind of motors connectors too, and I'm not a big fan of soldering the wiring to the motor unless you plan on not taking it back apart again. The only ones I would ever recommend doing that to is a high FPS DMR build, because you want to remove as much resistance as possible in that wiring setup so it doesn't get hot. Any resistance is going to make that wiring nice and toasty. And I know this because I tried to build one time out of the G3's gearbox with an M140 spring and a powerful motor, but I had Tamiya plugs, a crappy trigger assembly. I was not running a MOSFET. There was a lot of arcing going on, and there was a lot of heat that was going through those wires, and you do not want that. And that was just after a few shots off semi, which, I mean, I had to do for a DMR build because it was over assault rifle FPS for what our local field has. So, actually, I think I'm going to cut the video off here. If you have any questions about the different kind of parts that are in this gearbox, I can easily answer them. I'm pretty sure I've gone over everything. Whatever I haven't gone over, I mean, non-ported brass cylinder, standard inner barrel metal hop-up, normal version 2 spur and bevel gear. I'm pretty sure it uses a 6mm solid metal bushing, which I'm actually not the biggest fan of, but you can't get an 8mm extended gear version 2 gearbox with an 8mm bushing, which, I mean, technically you could modify one, but that would take pretty much a machinist, and a very good machinist at that, because that is a lot of precision handiwork that would have to go into something like that. I would not recommend doing that. If anything, if you want to get ball bearing 6mm, I know e-bike has some. I'm pretty sure they're either Matrix or some other brand, but I know they're out there. I'm not the biggest fan of 6mm gearboxes, but I am a big fan of the extended version 2. Just the shell overall. So, I mean, if they were 7mm, I'd be a lot happier, because that's sort of a good even ground. But they can be worked with, so that's alright. A couple things about the gearbox, if I hadn't already mentioned, that I would replace. I mean, I like the fact that it has silver wiring, but this looks like a pretty cheap trigger assembly. I mean, there's a few parts about it that's pretty good. There's like a wire holder so that the wires don't try and move on you. The trigger contacts look very solid. They're very nicely done. It's just the overall body and plastic of this trigger assembly seems cheap. Like the same kind of stuff that a cheap piston head or piston would be made out of. So, I mean, really that's not the biggest deal. And you really don't need a very good trigger assembly. It's just, if you were wanting to, that would be something to look at. Obviously, and I tell this to everyone, wire the gun to Deans, wire your battery to Deans. I am a Deans fanatic. I mean, I went so far as to make this junky NiCad 1500 milliamp battery that was on a large type connector into Deans, just so my friend would have something to use in his G3, because he got the same G3 I got. It's just your JG G3. My voice is going out. I need to finish this quickly. But I wired it to Deans, and most of my batteries that I have are Deans. All of my good guns are Deans, and Deans is just a much better battery plug overall. So much less resistance, so much better performance. So I would recommend doing that to any gun. It doesn't even matter what the gun is. It could be a SEMA, a JG, a KWA, a GNP, GNG, Tokyo Marui, anything. If it's not Deans, it should be. Some gun companies have actually already gotten on the Deans train, because they make their guns with Deans already on them now. They get it. GNP being one of them. Their gearboxes that you can buy, you can get the gearbox that comes pre-assembled with Deans, front or rear wired. It's so much better. And I wish I could have a comparison video to show, which, I mean, I probably could whenever I decide to convert another battery over. But I'll save that for another time. But it is definitely a better setup. But back to the couple things that I would replace. Air nozzle, piston and piston head. I'd get the SHS full metal tooth one, and it uses a standard version 2 piston head. So I really like the Garter CNC'd aluminum piston heads. But you could also get one of the silent ball bearing piston heads that Matrix or I think Angel Custom has a couple. And there's a few other piston heads, but the garter is one that I've always liked because it always has almost a perfect air seal with any cylinder that I put it in. And it's just a very, very good piston head. Another thing to replace, air seal nozzle. Get the Matrix version 2 CNC'd aluminum double O-ring cylinder heads. Those are very nice. I've used a couple of them. I would recommend those. They're decent for the price, and they have good air seal, which is really all you need for a good cylinder head. Or you could get a bore-up kit, which finding a bore-up kit for an extended Gearbox SR-25 is more difficult than you can ever imagine. Someone does make one, but it is so hard to find. I have spent hours upon hours trying to find them in stock. And they're either made by Garter or another company. Either Garter or Deepfire, I think. And either one of them is so hard to find. And I mean, they're going to be about the same price as a normal bore-up kit would be for a normal gun. So about that $60, $65 range for a cylinder head, piston head, and air seal nozzle. But it's so difficult to find one for this Gearbox. And I mean, you have to have, even if you still decided to go with a normal size piston, you still have, no matter what, you have to have the extended cylinder just because of the way the Gearbox is shaped. A normal cylinder will not fit in this Gearbox. At least not properly. So, there are options out there. Just keeping an eye open and finding what works best. That's really the only way to do it. But I thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to hit subscribe. I've got a lot more of these tech videos that'll be coming out soon, hopefully. It's whenever I get a free time to work on these guns. That's why it happens so early in the morning. It's about 1:30, I think, right now, or 1:40 in the morning. So it is very late when I do these videos because it's the only amount of free time that I get due to college and things that I work on during the day. And when I have nothing else going on. So that's why these videos happen so early in the morning. So that's why a lot of you guys won't be able to watch the live stream. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the live stream, only for me to make it easier to upload. Because once the live stream is over, it uploads and does all that stuff for me. And it's basically the lazy uploaders kind of setup. I mean, I could record it, because I do have that software and all that to record and then upload. But it would be the same exact quality, and at least this way I can see what is being shown on the screen and checking the audio and all that, so I wouldn't completely do a video and have it wasted, because I've had that multiple times where the audio was crap or something like that. But at least this way, it's very easy to set up and do. But if you like this video, be sure to hit subscribe. Any questions you guys have, you can leave them in the comments. As soon as you guys post a comment, it gets sent to my email on my phone. So I will know and hopefully be able to respond as soon as possible to your questions. But I thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.